This seminar, the process we're going to do, I'm going to give the mic over to Gary Jacobs of EasyTax and Conor Nolan of Ravenstone Consulting. We're calling it the Oncoming Storm. It's tax and VAT threats, to our industry, and because of the nature of what they're doing, with the gentleman wants an reaction. So I'll be among the audience with the microphone, and please, I'll find you. Just put your hand up for any questions. Okay, Gary, do you want me to introduce the first topic, or do you want to do an introduction? Okay, I think the first topic that Mr. Jacobs wants to talk about is HMRC conditionality.
He called me Mr. Thanks very much.
I know, it'll be the only time.
Hello. So what we're going to do today is it's just pretty easy going. We've got a few things that we're going to share with you, and there's some stuff that we can do. And this isn't just about tax, it's about compliance in the industry, and you've got a chance to have a legal person and a tax person sitting on a stage for free. So you can ask us any damn thing you want to. There's some stuff that we can talk about. There is some stuff that, and I'm just going to have to ask your indulgence, because obviously there's some stuff that can't talk about, because if it's a case that or a client that we're actively involved in, it's comments we can make. But we are certainly quite happy to make comment about any theoretical situation. And it's really just a chance to have a chat about it. So we've got 4 subjects that we're really going to talk about today. And I know some of you might want to come and, we've both got exhibition stands here, so some of you can have a chat with us at the stand if you want to. So the first thing we're really going to talk about, I think this is kind of my bag as well, which is conditionality. And anybody that's heard me speak before has heard me go on about it a lot. So a few years ago, the government in 2016 produced a paper that said we're going to make sure that certain trades that are licensed have to declare their tax status in order to become licensed. And strange enough, the first one that they went for is the passenger transport industry. So as from April this year, any operator or driver that has to renew their licence, have we got someone calling? Any passenger transport operative or company that has to renew their licence has to make a declaration. Now, the reality of this declaration is really quite simple. The one thing I want to say is anybody that knows anything about sole traders and what it's about, it's not your UTR, it's not your unique tax reference number. That seems to be everybody's obsession. When you are a sole trader, HMRC give you a little 10-digit number, unique tax reference number. For some reason, everybody's got to get it into their head that all they're supposed to do is give that number in. HMRC don't think that way. What they want you to do is to make a declaration. So what they ask you to do, and this is for every single driver, and operators too, but hopefully you should be a little bit further down the line. Every single driver, whether they're employed or self-employed, whatever their position, whether they're a limited company, have got to come away from their licensing process, or prior to their licensing process, have got to go through the government gateway. They've got to go through a series of 5 questions, and the questions are along the lines of: when did you get your licence? How long have you been working in this environment? Have you earned any money from this environment? So these are quite searching questions, and they have to make a declaration. They then press submit at the end of that declaration, and they're given a number, a one-off number. That number allows them to go back into the licensing environment. Putting that number in allows them to then get their licence. Without that one-off number, they will not relicense. And I make the point about relicense because any new driver coming is asked to make a declaration that they will adopt a taxation position, but it's done slightly differently, but they're still reminded. And the reason that they've got to do that is down the line, if they don't then register for tax, HMRC will remind them that they've said they would. So the whole thing is set up for you to make a declaration that you can then break, so that it fits in with HMRC's systems of how they fine people afterwards. It's a very simple thing. My experience is even drivers that are paying their tax are really well behaved, have never been a problem. I get scared. They've had to come out of their licensing environment. They've got to go into the HMRC website. So the best way that you can actually help your drivers not go and deliver parcels because they're scared to actually use the system. I mean, it's not an advertorial, but we've got a video that we give them that says what button to push, how to do it. But it's about introducing training into your environment to keep the drivers having a simple knowledge. So the tax checks are really straightforward. As to untaxed people, the idea is what you don't want to do is lose them. You don't want to lose them outside of the industry. All I can tell you is that the route to them being recognised by the HMRC is never as terrible as they think it is. It's, I think we've had this, drivers always think they're going to go to tax prison or they're going to lose their houses or £100,000. HMRC just wants them to register. Most of the guys we register them from, because obviously you can't go back more than 5 years anyway, so anybody with a 20-year history. It's never as expensive or as difficult as they think. Once again, we have the answer. Come talk to me on the stand. It's not for public forum to go through the detail, it's boring. But if you take away anything about tax checks and conditionality from this, it's as simple as this. You could be, up until now, you could choose to be disinterested as an operator in what your drivers get up to. If you remain disinterested in what your drivers are up to, you'll just lose them. We will lose them to the industry. They may well go on and do parcel delivery or food delivery, but guess what? The licensing structure will get to everybody eventually. That's the whole point, is to bring people out of the hidden economy. So that's tax checks and conditionality. If anybody's got any questions, by the way, please just come in straight away. But it's quite a straightforward thing. A very quick mention about MTD. You're also going to hear about making tax digital. Making tax digital is basically the digitisation of the tax process. It means that in 2024, everybody, and this is relevant to you as companies, to your drivers, eventually everybody will have to submit their tax details, their details 4 times a year. And also it's going to be done digitally. So, and this is, affecting 2024, it's sole traders and landlords over £10,000, I think it is, are going to be automatically. Now, once again, it hasn't necessarily got a massive meaning, but however, we're not going to have the guys who are walking in the door with it always a shoebox, isn't it? We've got another accountant in the audience, Paul, coming in with a shoebox full of receipts. These guys, it's another thing. Basically, it's another compliance thing that's going to make drivers' lives a nightmare. We are training our clients to use a very simple piece of software that we do that just photographs their receipts. There's plenty out of them. It will be an issue because, once again, these guys will just now be within the tax environment, and before you know it, within a couple of years, everybody will have a digital relationship with the HMRC. They can still do it through their accountant, but we're not going to have to get away with the environments. It means a lot of you as operators are going to have to start thinking about maybe an easy way to share data with accountants so that these guys' tax returns can be done easily, because what you want is you want the guys' wheels on the road earning money. You want them earning and you earning. So the more time they're involved in these other compliance measures, the harder it is. Once again, before this, you didn't have to worry about what they get up to. Now, if you don't at least think about or consider your relationship with your drivers and what their obligations are going to be under MTD, you're going to lose drivers. So we know, it's boring. I don't want to talk about driver shortages anymore. We all know that it's really, really difficult in the industry and there's all sorts of challenges. I thought the one thing we were really talking about is let's not make this one. MTD is a huge subject, making tax digital, and it's actually going to affect all of you as businesses. But once again, from our perspective, it's going to be the regularity of having a digital relationship. And you think about your drivers and how hard it was to move them from, the meter and the radio to using technology to be able to engage with them, which everybody does and they're used to it now. There's just going to be another little jump for everybody. So that's kind of the tax subjects covered to a certain extent.
Okay, can I now introduce Connor? Good point to introduce Connor. So this is Connor Nolan of Ravenstonedale Consulting, and Connor is predominantly going to speak here on the subject of, do apologise about this, VAT on fares with in-depth guidance on how to ensure your business is compliant.
I think it's fair to say Connor's going to give us a broad compliance overview.
Okay, broad. Okay, and by the way, anybody who wants to ask a question, please put your hand up of our esteemed panel of two.
All right, thanks, Graham and Gary. So, yeah, I have the fun job of talking a bit about the practice of everything Gary said and potentially more the threats. So, in particular, I did a talk last year for anyone who was here on worker status, and that's still, we would suggest, the elephant in the room. However, I do need to throw a cursory nod or acknowledgement to the current proceedings Uber have lodged in the High Court against Sefton Metropolitan Borough Council. We've had plenty of our own clients and other operators come to us asking us, is this something we need to be worried about? Now, every operator is different, but our general rule of thumb is, from our perspective as RSD, would be no. But I would suggest you seek legal advice if you think it is something you should be concerned about. But the reason why is Uber are looking for the court to clarify the 1976 Act in relation to who's principal in your average fare, your average booking. So 9 times out of 10, all of you or any operators in this room, you would be working as agent for a self-employed private hire or Hackney carriage driver. And I'm sure that is the case for nearly anyone here. So in that case, you're acting merely as an agent or an intermediary. Where what Uber are trying to do is change, much like they did in London last year, to get the court to say, well, no, actually, you're principal. Now, in law and contract, that means, well, you're responsible for everything, potentially even VAT. But our point of view, and speaking to our own counsel, is for the time being, it's not an immediate concern, but it could be down the line. Now, this is one thing I didn't want to touch on at all, to be honest, but I do feel it needs to be addressed that, from our perspective, they're asking a question that the Act actually answers in itself, but we'll only see what the court will say. And I'm not really going to speculate. So if you have any questions in relation to how do I think it will go, look, I wish I could guess or have a crystal ball, but I don't. So in that instance, I'm afraid we'll just have to wait and see what actually happens or transpires. Now, more pressing, and that has a far more definite impact on VAT on fares, is worker status. Now, as I touched on before, if you are working as an agent for a self-employed individual, well, clearly he's not your employee or worker. Can't be. So therefore, because of HMRC's guidance, and you can act as agent, and there's no VAT due on the fare, and that's a VAT notice 700-25. It's there for all to see, and that's how this industry has operated for years since that's gone into practice. However, you suddenly have a worker or an employee. That changes fundamentally your relationship with the driver. So rather than you're invoicing on behalf of a self-employed individual, they're now your agent and your principal. Certainly if they're an employee, you think about it, any of you have staff working in call centres, if they earned money for doing the job they're paid to do, you want that money. And that is the approach we would certainly suggest HMRC would take. Well, that's actually your money if he's your employee or worker. So where's the VAT and all the fares? So that, to us, is the more concerning of the two issues at the minute, particularly with Uber and worker status in particular. Now, bear in mind, they were found to be an employer of worker drivers. Now, potentially, we would suggest Uber are trying to, again, control the narrative, but that's their prerogative. They're a large company with deep pockets. They can do what they want, and that's fine. But for everyone else, what they did do is allow the industry to maybe take a moment and look at your working practices and go, hold on, are my drivers actually self-employed in practice? Or are they workers or even employees? So this is the opportunity, we feel, to talk about, well, how do you stop that? Well, there are numerous factors, and the tribunal, long story short, will look at everything. Any relevant factor they'll look at. Should a case be brought before a tribunal if a driver feels that they are due rights as a worker or an employee. But we would strongly suggest paperwork is a good place to start, but it's not worth the paper it's written on if you're doing things wrong in practice. So what we've done is we've teamed up with a company known as Indigo Group to help develop a compliance solution to help you manage your relationship with your drivers and ensure we will consider red flag practices aren't occurring. And amongst this, and to be honest, it's been a long time in the making, and to try and make it as all-encompassing as possible, because there are certain things you cannot do if someone's self-employed, such as dictate shift patterns. I don't know if you've ever tried to tell your plumber when he's coming to do work for you. 9 times out of 10, they're telling you, I'll be here on Tuesday, but I won't say which Tuesday, kind of thing. So the same very much applies, and there are plenty of other examples I could give you, and it's not an exhaustive list, but we're trying to help you manage that relationship and highlight any potentially risky, shall we say, working practices that could give rise to employment status or worker status. And you probably think, well, why does it matter? Well, VAT on fares is potentially a very big concern, because bear in mind, you haven't had the money. So it's not like you had any material benefit out of it. You're just getting hit with the potentially hit with a VAT bill. And that's something I think most of us could live without. And as well as that, potentially, and this is not an exhaustive list, you could have drivers trying to claim national minimum wage if they haven't earned it. You could have the right to not have unlawful deductions. And on that note, anecdotally speaking, we have worked on a tribunal where anyone here who does vehicle hire to drivers, that was taken into the calculation of national minimum wage by the tribunal. So if you think over how many years or months it might be, how much a driver may have paid for his vehicle, now you just think how much money that's going to equate when he needs to get that back because it was an unlawful deduction. It's quite frightening. And I will say in that instance, the only saving grace, if you will, was the driver didn't work very long for that operator. So the impact was minimal, but it's definitely something to bear in mind, because the court did permit it. And that went back from the EAT, the Employment Appeal Tribunal. And I can only say this because I worked on the case. So it's not a small issue, and it's not something we would suggest you overlook going, oh, it's fine. We've been doing this for years. It's not. Now is the moment to try and take control of the relationship by not taking control, if that makes sense. You have an opportunity to assess your working practices. I know Mr. Jacobs, that's something his company does, is he does these performance reviews, and certainly we are providing a compliance package to help you not step across the line and end up having workers or even employees. Now, employees have even more rights, but I'm not going to go into that right now. And I did mention this compliance platform called Gatsby, which is its name, Gatsby for Taxis. So it has been developed to be as user-friendly to drivers and operators, and it's an all-round compliance tool to help manage both the licensing perspective and primarily the potential employment relationship, and to help mitigate it and flag any potential risks you may have in your current working practices. Okay, and some of the key features are it does provide comprehensive status assessments, and the results are instantaneous for you to review. You also have the option to raise any queries direct to Ravenstonedale through the platform. You have collaborative assessments, and we'll be periodically checking or sending out assessments to both drivers and the operator to just keep under review, making sure bad habits don't sneak in. Because in the end of the day, most drivers are happy being self-employed, it suits them, but a select few may change that. So it's more just having that safety net in the background to help you monitor something that may get overlooked, because no doubt many operators in the room are more worried about the competition, such as Uber coming in, and drivers, or even finding drivers to fulfill bookings, which we're hearing plenty of from our clients, that there's lots of work and not enough drivers.
At that point, Connor, I know you mentioned queries, and so we've got an audience here. We've had an introduction by Gary on tax and Connor. Can I throw this open? Has anyone got any questions at this point before the gentleman carry on? I have a microphone here. Question? on making tax digital, tax conditionality.
One behind you, Graham.
Oh.
He's behind you.
Yes, thank you. 1 second. This is Kevin Wilshire, a driver from A1 Taxes in Northampton.
One point I was going to just mention is that if you drive like a coach or a bus or for passenger vehicle type vehicles, like, you know, work like that, it's actually 0 rated. Is there any prospect that it could be 0 rated for passengers in the future? For like taxis and private hires and limousines?
That's up to Parliament and government.
Yeah.
It's we can't certainly have no say in what happens there. But to me, if that was the case, it would be a logical solution.
Because it seems a structure that's been put in place, you know, for these you know, other sorts of businesses that involves more passengers on vehicles.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really good point. I mean, just listening to what Conrad says, and I mean, I feel that with questions, people are either going to have a great deal to say or nothing to say, because these are kind of quite controversial subjects, both the way that they're being rolled out. And really what I want to say is, if we take anything away from this morning, I've had loads of people, as an accountant, I fielded the day after the case and for weeks afterwards, people phoning me saying, is there VAT on fares today? Is that what I've got to do? And the other thing is that during the other court cases, I had people phone me up saying, do I have to now employ all my drivers? I think the one thing that you can all take away from this is that the government's embrace of the tax checks, in terms of the problems that we have with employment status and operator and driver relationships, along with the things that the Sefton case have thrown out and the possibility of compliance measures against operators and drivers and whether they pay VAT or not, are actually all related. The one thing that is really important, I've been saying to a lot of people, is that regulatory bodies cannot dictate tax. Simple as that. Governments can legislate for tax. So when we're talking about all of these subjects, we're talking about different points in the future. So let's say all the cases won or all the cases lost. That's not the end of the story. We're talking about the appetite of government to look at our industry and make sensible decisions, and we look at the appetite of politicians. And one of the problems that we have at the moment is I can't answer everyone's questions because it's not actually fixed law. And the life of most operators is there's national law, there's local regulatory law, there's business. I mean, there's 101. Somewhere at the end you've got to make a profit, which would be nice. But there's lots of different regulations. So all of these things are interrelated, which means that as an industry, we've got to face up to and adapt to all of these. So to the gentleman, yeah, it's a really good idea. It's a long way off because nothing is actually set in stone at the moment, I think it's fair to say. And that's, you know, really what we're doing is standing on a stage saying it's still grey.
Okay,
Paul.
I have another question here from the audience. 1 second. This is from Paul Whitehouse of Chariots Accountants in Portsmouth.
I hope it's not a tax question, Paul.
Well, kind of. It's more of an opinion from yourself in regards to the implications of the VAT, if it does come in, from the relationship between the driver and the operator. Now, what I'm kind of more liking to indicate is looking at CIS, which is a construction industry scheme, and the way they have got the reverse charge. So at the moment, that system is basically saying that the end user is the person that would have to pay the VAT. Could you see that possibly coming into the trade?
I'd look to Gary on this one, to be fair.
I think it's a great idea, but you and I both know that the government introduced the CIS scheme and then spent the rest of their time trying to drive a truck through it. But you know, I don't know if any of you are aware, the CIS scheme is a prescriptive scheme that HMRC or the government produced and HMRC put forward, where people in construction actually prepay their tax and then claim back their expenses afterwards. And it's aimed at self-employed. So it's actually a fantastic system because it did away with the cash base in construction and would suit our industry actually very well. Yeah. What do you think, Paul?
I think it's possible. I wouldn't say So I wouldn't say it's not on the cards at all. I'd say it's definitely a possibility.
I think from kind of a nice point of view, nothing would give us more pleasure than black and white and simple rule making. Actually, that's what we all need.
I think
Speaking of black and white, we've got a question here from Dave Lorry, who is, as you know, is always black and white.
I think we've put out a survey to our membership, and we've spoken several times on various topics. I think the issue that we've got with the Sefton case is it's very much focused around if. If is a very, very big word. And the fact of the matter is, as far as our membership is concerned, that is based on turnover. So if you're operating in the same manner as Uber and you're taking payments for all those fares like Uber does, then yes, of course, that is part of your turnover. But if you're a smaller operator and your turnover is the radio rent that you're charging to your drivers, then the VAT on fares is irrelevant because that is not your turnover. So it doesn't affect you at all. It affects the driver because it's their turnover. Unless they're VAT registered, it's not going to affect anybody else at all. And that's the question, is the if. There are some operators that are concerned that it might affect them. And they're putting their name in the hat and they're putting their name in the ring for the Sefton case. But the overall result that we're getting is it doesn't affect them. They don't feel that it affects them. And if it does, depending on the outcome of the case, that's when they'll assess it differently. But the way we see it is they're trying to mix 4 pieces of legislation here. They're trying to mix employment law, VAT law, licensing law, and contract law. And the 4 don't mix.
The industry, if I may, Gary, is not black. Unfortunately, anyone who works in this industry it's not black and white. And Gary touched on it previously. There is no overriding rule book, so to speak, that everything is clearly defined in one place. It's a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and a little bit from there. Now, what you say, you have a point, but ultimately, for example, if that did have to be charged on fares, and just looking from it, no matter what way you look at it. So if I'm paying £5 to go A to B, and I'm now paying 6, or you're reducing the figure by a sixth, really, if you're keeping it at £5, the driver's getting a sixth less. So it's very difficult to say it's not going to affect. It will ultimately affect the driver or the end user more, because if the operator just ends up having to collect it. Potentially that could be one of numerous options or realities that could happen. But to put it very simply, and this is complete conjecture, so it's an example and nothing more, right? If you're an operator, okay, and HMRC come up, or the law comes in and says you're principal in every respect. Now, what that would mean is you're principal on the booking, which means you're a principal contractor, meaning from HMRC's perspective, you could be the one who should be charging VAT on the whole fare, and therefore you have the responsibility to report it, collect it, and pay it over to HMRC. That's one potential scenario, and I see where you're coming from, but if you change everything and make you principal on everything, it gets a little bit more muddy, if you know what I mean. And still, even if, and again, you said it's the if, even if the Uber case gets answered, depending on how the High Court respond to it, again, there can still be many shades of grey left. For example, you could be principal but still have self-employed drivers underneath. So there's fares, and it can be messy, but it's still not untenable. But it certainly would need, read the judgment, look at working practice, and see what happens. And this is why I spoke, the oncoming storm, and it's really the ongoing storm, really, of worker status. That's not new. That hasn't gone anywhere. And often many drivers don't realise maybe they are actually better off, self-employed. Maybe they are. They just realise they think they want holiday pay. So there are many. Unfortunately it's a many-sided coin here, not just a two-sided coin. And this is why we developed a compliance tool to help manage the relationship through a neutral platform, which coincidentally was a similar system was set up for IR35 in the construction industry. So it's based, not an adaptation, but it's been built purposely for the private hire and hackney industry, but mainly for operators.
Okay, we have another question here from Nick Goulding of Club Class Travel in Northwich to you, gentlemen.
Yeah, if you look at the Uber position, it was apparent to me for a long time that in practice they were operating as the principal. They were collecting the fares, they were taking the bookings, and they were directing the drivers. You're right that there was a diversion onto the employment law status, but that sort of sidestepped the VAT issue. And as all of this legal stuff comes through, and as it becomes more apparent that Uber was the principal and should be accounting for VAT on all of their fares, which I believe to be the correct position, do you think there's any prospect that the government will go for all the back tax for the time they've been operating up to now?
I think I can answer that question.
Please don't.
You make valid comments, if I may, Gary. As far as your understanding, I would say is on solid ground. Now, the actual what the government may or may not do, I wouldn't hazard a guess. But just looking practically, you could.
It's a hard one to answer because I don't necessarily agree with your standing of how clear-cut their VAT status is.
Well, that's a question of, I believe, that HMRC has been skirting around, was staring them in the face as to how they actually operate. I mean, I should say I used to be part of the National Joint VAT Consultative Committee, which is the top level, originally Customs and Excise, and then HMRC consultation with businesses and the excise authorities. It's clear to me that there has been political guidance in how the revenue authorities have approached it, and there's been a serious reluctance of them to engage with operators at the scale of Uber to achieve a level playing field. If I operated in the same way with my local taxi company, operating 60 or 70 cabs, where I was directing everything in the way that Uber directs and requires my drivers to work under the same conditions as Uber, there's little doubt in my mind that I would have been pursued as the principal, both from a VAT point of view, and also I'd have been wide open on the employment side. And if they would have treated me like that, and I'm pretty sure they would have treated me like that. In fact, I went through a tax investigation because I've organised myself so I step, as I see it, just inside the line so that they can't. The letter that I had from HMRC basically said that we don't agree with you, but we don't think we've got enough evidence to actually pursue you, so we're going to drop it, and we're just not going to take it further, which was a pretty sort of keeping their sort of ammunition open response. And I've been sitting with that for the last 4 years, and they haven't pursued it since then. But I sort of have a feeling that they're waiting to come back on that sort of arrangement. And like I said, given that I was much more one side of the line than Uber was with my arrangements, I'm pretty sure that had I used the same contracts and method of working with my drivers, they would have come for me. But they didn't come for Uber. I think that's only political. I think it's partly tied up with the role that the European Commission had in directing VAT policy and where they restricted the UK government. Now that we're out of the European Union, I don't see that those same restrictions apply, and I do think that they should go forward and get that tax off Uber and bring them onto a level playing field with ordinary operators.
Were you here at from the beginning of the seminar? No, I did briefly touch on both. So I did touch on Sefton and the potential impact of it in regards to that. But what revenue do in a private investigation, which ultimately it would be, even if they are looking at it, we wouldn't know unless someone made it public, because that would be Uber's private tax affairs. I'm not going to hazard a guess on it, but we don't know. I wouldn't like to hazard a guess. And would it level the playing field? Well, I'd potentially say it would be an incredibly hefty bill if they were going for back tax on all fares Uber did. Think of what the turnover would be then if you're assessing it that way. But again, wouldn't be able to really comment with any form of clarity or conviction.
I think the one thing that I would also take away from this is I absolutely accept that Uber had an issue with VAT before the Supreme Court ruling before the appeal, before the tribunal. It was an elephant in the room that just came to surface afterwards, and I accept that. And it's something from a governmental point of view that obviously nothing was done, but it's a private company. So,
on just a closing note, I will say, and I can say anecdotally, I have seen HMRC go for agent principal on account work, and I have seen that clear as day, and that has changed and been changing from what I've seen. So they are whether they're changing in one aspect or another, there does appear to be a change in their mentality of how the industry do operate.
And we have to remember there are plenty of operators who are principal operators there. It's not like it's not an unknown model.
Okay, we have a question here from a Kevin Thomas of Kidderminster.
Yeah, sorry, it's just on the VAT point actually. So HMRC did make a VAT assessment against Uber in the tune of 1.5 billion. And Uber did provide in their accounts some in the range of a sort of 200 million, I think. So the backdated issue is a live issue, and I think HMRC are pursuing that. So just to be clear on that, that is in the public knowledge, or public domain rather.
Okay, we have a question from Abdul Kayat of the NPHTA.
Good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. I would like to ask a little question regarding the conditionality tax checks, because it is associated with our badge. If we don't provide that number, they don't issue the badge. But you said that you can prevent it. I just want to know how this method will work.
No, you can't prevent it. Sorry.
Well, it's written there.
Sorry.
In this leaflet, it's got the conditionality tax checks. Prevent the tax checks legislation reducing your driver numbers. We help you get your driver's tax.
Prevent you reducing your driver number by doing the tax. That's the point. So the idea is from an operator's perspective, it means that we're really saying to operators, you've got to think about engaging with your workforce to get the tax checks done. The drivers absolutely have to do them. We are saying that you can prevent shortages by actually helping the drivers to get it done by bringing in people like us, people like Paul, to get them through the tax checks.
Okay, before I come to an addendum question to Paul, can I open, does anyone else want the next question? Before I come back? Okay, Paul, your addendum question.
Yeah, it's just one last thing on the HMRC approach. Gary, from your experience, with an investigation, do you generally find that if it's going to be worth their while? Because I've kind of dealt with HMRC a few times, and they just treat it like a business. HMRC is a business, effectively. So if they look at your case and they say, well, yes, we do have to do further investigations, but it's going to cost us more money than we're going to make from you, they're not going to bother.
A few years ago, HMRC actually started to bring in outside qualified accountants onto their staff as opposed to their internally trained people. And if you notice, since then, there's more bottom line going on in the HMRC. So once upon a time, if you were being investigated by the HMRC and the inspector was having a bad day, they could just be hanging on like a angry bulldog for years and years and years. They do seem to have become more... Well, also the fact that we as a country managed to lose billions of pounds in fraud during the pandemic with the grants and bits and pieces, and the HMRC only have a limited amount of people to do the job, and they have now got to claw the money back. So what's interesting is we've seen, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right, we've seen a new zeitgeist where HMRC are going, is it worth pursuing? And I've actually had a recently current investigation that I was working on where the officer came back to me and went, yeah, all right, it's not going as well as we thought it would go. They used to look for the weak wildebeest at the edge of the herd. Now they seem to be more interested in the big fat wildebeest. So maybe things will change. It's a really good point, actually, because they have an appetite now to get the money back.
Okay, we have an addendum from Dave of the NPHTA as well.
Yeah, very quickly on the subject of tax conditionality, as you and I both know, Gary, we've been in the seminars. The tax conditionality applies to drivers and operators. It does not apply to vehicles. And what we've come across in various regions is the local authority have rolled it out to the vehicle renewal as well. So we've gone back and said, no, it's not the vehicles, and the council has then said, well, put it in as though it's a driver and get your code that way. Otherwise, we're not going to give you your plate. So I came across one of them, I actually reported them and included HMRC in the report and said, you are now advising the driver to commit an act of fraud against HMRC by applying for something under fraudulent means. So it's very, very important that everybody in the industry is aware it does not apply to vehicles.
Correct, only humans. However, I've got to say a very quick word for poor licensing officers who I think were given not as complete and prescriptive a way of, I have to, we've done seminars, and I've done seminars with the Institute of Licensing, and there was not the right prescriptive amount of information given down to the licensing officers, and I actually feel for them. Not only want to feel terribly sorry for licensing officers, but I genuinely, they were put in an invidious position because they weren't given a prescriptive way of having to deal with it. So, yeah, big love, licensing officers.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? Are you happy to proceed, or shall I wind things up?
You're more than welcome to wind it up. I just want to say one last thing, and I'm just going to repeat myself, which is the one thing you must take away from this is all of these very emotive and controversial subjects. First of all, we can only give opinions because there's a lot more to come from where we're going. And the second thing is everything we've talked about is related. And I think that's the most important thing, which is why we as an industry have to take it seriously.
Colin, last words from you?
No, I just echo everything Gary just said as a closing point, and I wouldn't, and on that, we would certainly suggest don't put your head in the sand in relation to any of the issues we've spoken about, because the times are changing. You either change with them, or unfortunately may wake up one day and find things aren't exactly great. But that would certainly be the closing note would be just be aware of what's going on in the industry, and where possible, try and stay on top of it.
Okay, well, I'll put in the advertorial here. Gary Jacobs of EasyTax is in our auditorium. Conor Nolan is on his stand over there, so they have all day to speak to you if you want to speak to them privately. But at this point, can I thank everyone for their attendance, and can I have a round of applause for Gary Jacobs and Conor Nolan?
Thank you.